Hi everyone, hope you're well. My name's Nadia and my talk is on valuing madness and decolonizing disability. This image shows the title of the talk and it also shows a content note which states oppression covered extensively. So this is referring to many different forms of oppression that will be talked about in this presentation, including sexism, racism and coloniality. My background is in diversity and inequalities. I have a master's degree in gender policy and inequalities from the London School of Economics. I have a lot of experiential and lived experience of these themes. Professionally, I have always focused on inequalities, diversity related organisations and types of work. So yeah, this is my favourite area. I want to start with looking at feminist theory in particular. And so why is feminist theory so important? Why is it useful? And what does it do? So one of the beauties of feminist theory is that it allows us to analyze and expose power relationships and dislodges assumptions of our culture being neutral. So it acknowledges that our culture has been tied to, quote, militarism, capitalism, colonialism and male supremacy. So that's a quote from Haraway, 1988. We can use these forms of thinking to look at our history, or really anything. You can apply it to literally anything and find out what the assumptions are that exist around these concepts or cultural artifacts. So it specifically identifies assumptions, mainly surrounding identity and categories, and so that actually comprises of quite a lot of things. So it started off as looking at gendered assumptions, so how we gender men and women, and then it started to expand. So you can really use it for any type of marginalization, and that's what it's began to do, and that's why feminism has become very relevant to many people, and one of the reasons why it's been globalized. It facilitates a lot of understanding about things that are usually unseen because our culture assumes it is neutral. It kind of pretends it is neutral. So a scientist will say they're neutral, and politicians might say they're neutral, but these lenses show that is actually nearly impossible to achieve due to these histories that are loaded with all this kind of garbage, oppressive garbage, as you will. Theorists such as Kimberly Crenshaw have, she came up with intersectionality as a concept, which highlights the crossovers between forms of oppression. So if someone's a black woman, they are likely to experience both racism and sexism in society because of these crossovers of forms of oppression. And so one of the things that has been really important around my feminist work and psychedelia is showing not only that psychedelic theory is very relevant theoretically to and conceptually to feminist theory. For example, both show people dynamics that are usually unseen. Both are usually around identity destabilization. So they both allow us to see the plasticity of categories, identities, and things that our culture assumes as neutral and easily quantifiable and easily categorized into, say, one singular category. They are both forms of knowledge that are accessed by, ironically, by the most privileged peoples, when they could in fact help marginalized groups the most. So there's a lot of, like with any field, these loaded histories of oppression still dominate psychedelics, the psychedelic community. Many psychedelic organizations might claim to be very into equality and feminism, but actually some of their practices are very oppressive, and I've seen that firsthand myself. I've worked in very large organizations in psychedelics, and I've had to leave. I was head of diversity at one of them, and I had to leave because of the oppression and the sexual harassment that I experienced myself. And so this irony is quite common. And in feminist theory, the way that we deal with it is reflexive practice, which is where you try to internalize these theories and anti-oppressive ideas and knowledge. And so on this note, now I will move to decolonization. And what is decolonization and decolonizing things? So this process is the process of undoing colonizing practices. For example, if I was to try to confront and challenge the colonizing practices that have influenced education and how we teach history, for example, that would be considered a decolonizing practice. So the reason why I'm looking at decolonizing disability is because our view of madness and disability is very colonial, it's very narrow, and it's very oppositional and binary. And when we look at how different cultures and communities and societies have viewed disability and madness, we can see that rather than the only negative narrative that Western society has globalized, Western Anglo-American society, we in fact have much more diversity in how these experiences are conceptualized, which means they are given much more value in different communities and societies. And that's something I think our community should really investigate and promote, rather than this only negative narrative that has been mainstreamed and we've all experienced. And so here is a model from an ecofeminist called Plumwood, and I've used this a lot to illustrate some of the connectedness of oppression and how we categorized disability and madness. And so Plumwood shows us how gender is related to many different forms of oppression, and how it is a mechanism through which Anglo-American culture has used to separate certain areas, but also devalue and value different areas. And so here you can see how on the left there is masculinized parts of our culture and parts of how we categorize peoples and things. And then on the right there is the feminized areas. So the masculinized are valued areas, and the masculinization process is associated with valuing those categories more. And the feminized is associated, unfortunately, with devaluing these areas. This allows us to conceptually be okay with exploiting something that we don't consider human. And that's what this critically links to, is the extraction of the humanness from oppressed peoples, and that's what feeds into violence towards them. And when I studied gender-based violence, what I found was it was regarding people as human less than human that enabled gender-based violence to happen. And so that's why you find sexism plays directly into forms of gender-based violence, because the sexism means that people think of women as less than human. I have created an extension of Plumwood's master model, and so I have put able-bodied in the masculinized and valued, disabled in the feminized and devalued, and then we have neurotypical, masculinized and valued, so we have that rational mind, very Western, very narrow, and then we have neurodivergent. And in this category I would also say that's where we would categorize, put in categories such as insanity and madness, mental distress and mental illness. And so these are on the feminized and devalued side. And so these are very damaging categories, with real big implications for everyone in the world, really. Now we understand the very overly simplistic way that our culture categorizes these experiences. The critical thing I want to illustrate here is that this is how we decide as a culture where humanness is allocated. And so there's a great quote here from Butler, which says, the matter that must be addressed constantly and forcefully is the differential allocation of humanness, the perpetually shifting and variably positioned boundary between those who are rendered properly human and those who are not. And so one of the many reasons why critical theory, feminist disability studies, decolonizing ideas and practices are so important is because they allow us to revalue oppressed peoples. They allow us to rehumanize people and prioritize people as they should have already been. And so there's a great quote here which I really identified with. Being someone who has been framed as mad much of my life, and felt devalued as a result, it states, it's from Albrecht, my being named mentally ill led me to view myself as a problem, my histories and experiences as deficient, defective, and my perceptions as delusional. My being named this way also brought me to disability studies, which has helped me to realize that my experiences, histories, and perceptions are both valid and valuable. So there we have an exact quote illustrating that value being put back in its rightful place. And so when we look at madness and mental health struggles and disability through a decolonizing lens and a critical lens, we see that many different cultures in the world have seen these experiences very differently to how ours does. So according to the Hmong, an East Asian ethnic group in China and Southeast Asia, they view epilepsy and autism as an indication of spiritual and healing power. And Saka shamans from Siberia and shamans from Peru view people with physical disabilities as people who have healing gifts. The Atako in Japan consider those with visual impairments as being able to see into different informing realities because of their lack of vision in this realm. And the Dagara tribe in West Africa believe that mental distress is a valuable experience, not to romanticize that experience either. These things can be very difficult and challenging for people. But the Dagara also believe that there is insights that can be gained from these experiences that are important to be acknowledged, and it's important for their community to listen to these experiences. This image shows a print screen of a Google search results, and at the top there's a Washington Post article titled "How a West African Shaman Helped My Schizophrenic Son in a Way Western Medicine Couldn't." On the right, there's an image of two gentlemen who are assumed to be the father and the son that this story is based around. The second article, which shows a related post, is titled Ancient Solutions, The Shamanic View of Mental Illness. And this is by Vermillion. And on the right is a picture of what seems to be a hand holding a cross. They have trained spiritual practitioners who aid people through this process. This has become such a famous part of this community that even an American patient with schizophrenia travelled there. He was allowed to travel there and live there and ended up living there for 4 years because his experience was so normalised and therefore accepted, and he found it so much more healthier for him to be there because of the damaging American system he came from compared to the way the Dagara approached his experiences of psychosis and schizophrenia. So what I'm saying is not that we should suddenly believe in these spiritual notions and belief systems of other cultures, but we can't so arrogantly assume that we know everything to the point where we can completely exclude other cultures' interpretations of mental illness, madness, and disability. And so this is also seen within psychedelic research itself. For some people, especially it seems vulnerable populations, psychedelics has provided a lot of people with healing potentials, such as with depression, PTSD, anxiety, and there are also reports of it helping to support people with autism. And one of the reasons why breakthroughs have happened on psychedelic, in terms of psychedelic healing, is because they encourage a psychotic experience in the person, a schema breakdown. And by that I mean someone's identity might break down and splinter, or they might experience ego death, or something happens which is equated to what modern society would call psychosis. And yet it is exactly these experiences which provoke the healing that happens in many psychedelic therapy sessions, in research. And so it really it forces us to question whether or not mental distress is purely negative and something that is demonized and awful only. When other cultures see that psychosis has value, yes, it is dangerous and challenging sometimes, and there are many things that are concerning about it, but this is quite varied. And I know for myself, as someone who has had a psychotic episode, that it was one of the most important experiences of my life. It made me incredibly spiritual, and because I couldn't deny what I saw, and it showed me that environmental devastation is an epically disastrous issue that needed to be addressed immediately. And interestingly, some of my peers have had exactly the same lessons from their own psychotic episodes, which had a huge environmental focus, and it showed how desperately we needed to radically change our system in order to protect the environment and our biosphere. And so what I'm illustrating here is that, yes, there are serious issues with mental health struggles, but these things happen because people respond to distressing circumstances, and so they are natural responses to unreasonable circumstances, unreasonable experiences, and an unreasonable society. So a society that is based on neoliberalism and capitalism, which puts profit before human lives, that is an unreasonable and mad culture to exist in. And so to respond in the ways that so-called mad people have responded to those environments, to their bad experiences, these are reasonable reactions. So the Dagara, for example, view people that are in mental distress as people who have important insights to share with the world, and that this is happening for a reason, and this person needs to go through that process with ideally educated support, which is what we're lacking in our culture, whereas we just medicalize it and kind of shut it down. And I'm not saying that's not okay. We live in this culture, so we need to handle these things in the best ways that we can handle them. But if we had more people that were educated in decolonizing and decolonial ideas of madness, I think it would really help to support people with mental distress. Another important point is that so-called madness and mental distress and mental illnesses, these are often exacerbated when they are denied, when they're demonized, when people approach people in distress and frame it as divergent, as unusual, as not normal. But what I'm saying is this is normal, so it is natural. And when we approach people with this knowledge, with this understanding that what they're going through is valuable and valid, that normalization actually reduces the symptoms of distress. In summary, I hope I've shown you how feminist theory can really help feed into how we look at madness, and how psychedelics can show how madness is a valuable aspect of different processes, and in some cases for healing itself. As I said, psychedelic research often enters states and mental landscapes which modern society would consider as madness. However, they have shown to heal people a lot of the time if done correctly, and handled with care. And so it really problematizes Western forms of categorization and these overly simplistic and basically, incredibly damaging notions of madness and insanity and what we consider normal and abnormal. It questions all of these things. And I hope that my talk shows you how important this field is, in both showing that madness can be a valuable experience and disability as well. And I hope it challenges some of the damaging ways our society looks at these categories. Thank you very much, and I hope this was informative, and I really appreciate this experience and being able to talk about something that I feel so passionately about. Thank you very much. Bye.